afternoon. My name is Jeanette Marks, and welcome to our last fall book for lunch. We will resume in the spring on March the 3rd. So if you want to mark your calendars, March 3rd we'll come back with our spring session. Next Thursday, November 3rd at 7 p.m., the Word Main Library right here in the Kanzler Room will host a Gordon Lightfoot tribute concert by Jackie Davidson and Gary Grant. Registration is required. The 29th annual Gift of Reading program will begin November 7th. Please consider donating a new children's book or gift of money at any library branch through December 3rd. This program is in cooperation with the Literacy Council of Bay County. Last year, 2,600 books were provided to area organizations who then put the books into the hands of local children. Our reviewer today is Margaret Bird, a retired high school English teacher and librarian, and a retired reference substitute here at Bay County Library System. Margaret holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Latin, a master's degree in English, and a master's in School of Library Science. She is an active participant in the Bay City Players, a Friends of the Bay County Library board member, is a commissioned lay minister for the Diocese of Saginaw, and is an active member of All Saints Parish. She has been married to her husband Leeds for 48 years. She loves theater and travel. So please welcome Margaret as she reviews The Summer Before the War by Helen Simonson.
Thank you for that warm greeting. I seem to be attracted to books with war settings. The last book I reviewed for a Book for Lunch series was All the Light We Cannot See, which is a World War II setting and takes place in both France and Germany. Now maybe I'm attracted to that particular time period because I was born on an anniversary of Pearl Harbor Day, but I'm not going to tell you which anniversary. The Summer Before the War is a World War I setting, and it too has two locations, primarily England, and some portion takes place in France. The summer of the title is 1914, 10 years before 1924, which was the title of the book that Andreas Teich reviewed last week. So we're in a similar time period. Now, I don't remember how I first heard about this book, perhaps from BookPage, available here and at all branch libraries and provided by the Friends of the Bay County Libraries, of which I have been a board member for more years than I can even remember at this point. Now maybe I was attracted by the book jacket. Those in the back may not be able to see this too well, but I just find this an absolutely charming book jacket. The main character who's portrayed on this book jacket, maybe that was the source of my appeal, because this young woman came to an unknown area to teach Latin, just as I did in 1964. Coming from Detroit to Essexville, never heard of it. The announcement for a English and Latin teacher, combination thereof, was posted on the board of the education department at Marygrove College, where I was a student. Now, Beatrice Nash, the young woman pictured on this cover, on her bicycle, arrived at her destination in England by train, but she brought her bicycle with her. And a bicycle was considered a very inappropriate mode of transportation for a woman at this time. Well, I too arrived at my destination on a rather, I think, unusual mode of transportation. I came from Detroit to Bay City on the Greyhound bus because I didn't drive. So that's another connection I feel I have with Beatrice. I did learn to drive, however, bought a car, learned how to drive, and before I moved up here in the fall of 1964. If you can see this, you may also notice that Beatrice is wearing a hat and gloves, both very appropriate attire for a job interview, just as I wore a hat and gloves when I came here for my job interview. Now, 50 years between Beatrice's first job and mine, 50 plus years since the beginning of my career and now, and my, how things have changed. And I don't just mean modes of transportation or dress. Now, one other possibility for my attraction to this book is that part one opens with an epigraph by Henry James. Now, why would that interest me? Because I am one of the charter members of a book club called the James Girls. Two other members of the group I see are in the audience here today. Now, we assumed that name early in our almost 20-year history as a book club because we read Henry James' The Wings of the Dove. And let me tell you, that almost caused the dissolution of our book group early in its history. It was a bit more like required reading in a graduate literature class than what we had thought it would be. We persevered, however, and have been amazed to find, and frankly we look for them, references to Henry James in many of the other books that we have read. And we did go back and give the man another try. So we've reread a couple of his books since that first daunting effort. In addition to the epigraph I mentioned, one of the characters in the book is actually modeled after our friend Henry. And I'll point that out as we go along. Helen Simonson, the author of this book, I wasn't able to find a whole lot of information about her, but I do know that she was born and raised in England, and in her teenage years, the family moved to the countryside in Sussex, a little town called Rye, and that is where much of this novel is set. Rye is literary country. Henry James, Virginia Woolf, Edith Wharton, Rudyard Kipling, among others, spent time in Rye, and the author credits all of those authors with having influenced her. Now, Helen does admit, however, to being anxious to get away from England. She left Rye to go to the London School of Economics, where she took a degree in advertising. And she said of herself, "I'm one of those people who believes that children need to go out in the world, the farther the better. But those of us who go off to explore are left with a hold, kind of a push-pull situation." Helen married an American, moved to this country, started a career in advertising, lived for some time in Washington, D.C., but for the majority of her life she has lived in Brooklyn. She does return to England often. She says, "I have a deep longing for home." When her two sons were young, Helen enrolled in a class at the New York's 92nd Street Y. As she says, just to get out of the house and away from diapers and baby gym class. That class she enrolled in was called Beginner Fiction, and I think she must have been a pretty good student. Her first book, Major Pettigrew's Last Stand, was published in 2010 when she was 45 years old. As Helen said on her website, "I hope I am living proof that it is never too late to follow your passion or find a new career." Major Pettigrew's Last Stand was a New York Times bestseller and an international success. It has a contemporary setting. The retired major of the title forms an unlikely friendship with the Pakistani woman, and both of them are grieving the loss of their spouses, and they bond over their shared love of literature. I read this book when it first came out, and I was charmed by that book as well, which may have been why I returned to Helen's second book. The Summer Before the War is historical fiction for which Simonson did a great deal of research, including reading war diaries and surgical textbooks. Simon has said that her next book will not have a historical setting because of the amount of research needed. In fact, she's not even talking about the next book. The more I talk, the less I write. Now, this book pays tribute to the author's fascination with the Edwardian era, and especially with the writers of that time. In an interview published in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, the author talked about her writing technique. I really try not to compose a plot, or an outline, or a plan. I follow my characters and try not to know where they're going. Now, that sounds like a pretty loose approach to me for writing, but it seems to work for Helen. Reviews of this book are generally favorable, but they're not 4-star or rave reviews, as was the case with her first novel. The New York Times calls it gentle, with charming descriptions and containing bits of historical detail. I disagree with that. There's a lot, I think, of historical detail. The Star Tribune calls it a satisfying and heartbreaking book. NPR refers to it as a gentle comedy of provincial manners, containing droll dialogue and with much attention to sensory detail. The contrast between pastoral peace and the violent chaos of war is what gives this novel its heft, says that reviewer. The Washington Post says the book deftly observes the effect of war on the staid Edwardian sensibilities regarding gender, money, and class. It's a serious novel about class cruelty on and off the battlefield. And this is kind of a tempering portion of that same review. It may seem at times that Simonson takes too long to move her story from Rye to continental Europe, but when the plot finally drops us into the trenches, the juxtaposition of the villagers' naivete with the soldiers' suffering effectively shell shocks readers. BookReporter.com notes that the book champions the cause of outsiders, such as refugees, feminists, those who choose alternative lifestyles. And interesting to me is that this particular reviewer suggests that it would be nice for someone to option the book for television, now that we need something to replace Downton Abbey, of course. Bookpage comments on the issues raised in the book, dealing with class, gender, ethnicity, money, and praises the book because it not only takes readers back to the past, but also gives them a new perspective on the present. And just where have we been hearing about these issues recently? Same issues. The novel itself is structured in 4 parts and a very brief epilogue. Each of the 4 parts is introduced by an epigraph. I mentioned Henry James gets credit, I think I said that, for one of them. British authors Wilfred Owen and Rupert Brooke and Rudyard Kipling and others of those epigraphs. The first 3 parts are set in England. Part 4 moves to France, and the epilogue actually shifts time several years after the war and takes place in both England and France. I think Helen Simonson is particularly adept at many things, but her characters are, I just find them extremely realistic, charming, some lovable, some not so much. But I'm just going to introduce you to a few of them so that when I mention their names later, you might have a little frame of reference at least. So I'll start with the major characters in the 3 portions of the novel set in Rye, the English characters. Hugh Grange and Daniel Bookham. Hugh is a medical student who has a mentor in Dr. Alex Ramsey, who lives in London. Dr. Alex Ramsey has a daughter, Lucy, and there is the potential of romance between Hugh and Lucy. Daniel Bookham is his cousin, Daniel is a poet. Daniel has a flair for life. And Daniel is thus suspect by some of the people who populate Rye. Both of these young men are nephews of Agatha and John Kent. Aunt Agatha, as she's usually referred to in the novels, one of the leading personages in this little town of Rye. Her husband John is a British government official and spends much of his time in London, particularly as the war gets closer. Main character, Beatrice Nash, and I even think the author's selection of a name for a character. Beatrice, the word means bringer of joy and blessing, and she certainly was to this town. Beatrice is 23. She's the daughter of an American woman and an English gentleman, and that marriage caused the English gentleman to be disowned by his family, and he in turn then disowned his family. That disowning was the result of his marrying this American woman. Beatrice is an independent woman. Her mother has died quite a few years before, and Beatrice has been her father's constant companion on his rather wandering throughout the world. She's traveled with him, but now needs to support herself after her father's death. Now, strangely enough, father puts all of Beatrice's inheritance in trust, governed by Lord and Lady Mabberley, the family from whom he has estranged himself for all these years. Why? We don't know. They, lovely people that they are denying Beatrice access to all but a very small allowance in her inheritance until such time as she should do the thing that every woman at that time was intended to do, which is get married, yes. And Beatrice is very clear about her preference in that respect. Beatrice is described in various reviews as combining inner strength and outer beauty, being clever and stubborn by turn. And she's much of what we will focus on as I talk about the story itself. We also meet from the people of Rye, Colonel Wheaton, whose wife is Lady Emily. And Lady Emily and Aunt Agatha, I think, are kind of rivals for top dog in this little small community. This couple has a son named Harry, and he flits in and out of the story, but he's not really one of the serious characters here. But daughter Eleanor is married to a German and has a German nanny for her baby, so I think you can already anticipate that that could cause trouble. Professor Tillingham is the Henry James character, and some critics say he is highly fictionalized, but they also consider him a caricature, and I just think he's a character. He's found a nice, comfortable niche there in Rye, and he's invited to lunch and dinner, and that makes him very happy, and things are just fine for him as far as he's concerned. And then we have to have the small town mayor and his wife, who may be small town people, but they are very impressed with their own importance. Mayor Fothergill and his wife Bettina. Now, the other characters that I want to introduce you to are characters that I think the author deliberately chooses to illustrate themes of the novel or to represent the outsiders, those who are going to disturb life in Rye. The author even adds characters late in the novel, and the two in particular whom she adds in the very last portion of the book are Archie and Bill, who are ambulance drivers, and they serve very well, and they also serve up a whole lot of black humor with what they are doing. Oh, I forgot, I almost skipped over, well, no, I kind of jumped ahead here a little, so let me go back to these other outside characters. Celeste, another, I think, interesting choice of name because the word itself means heavenly. She is one of the Belgian refugees who comes to Rye with her professor father, And interesting, and I did not know this until it was mentioned in a couple of reviews, 250,000 Belgian refugees were taken in England, supported, welcomed. Another important character is Richard Sidley, who's better known as Snout. What a nice name, huh? Snout. He's a young boy, a half gypsy. There you get the other outside influence. And, surprisingly enough, an outstanding Latin student. Alice Finch and Minnie Buttles arrive together in Rye. They are what are described as practitioners of a bohemian lifestyle. And they have a photography studio, and some of their photographs are really rather racy, I think, for the time. Algernon and Amberley Firth, another couple who come to Rye, and they are known for their scandalous marriage. And I've already mentioned Archie and Bill. You'll hear other names that I haven't singled out here, but those are, I think, the primary characters that we need to consider. One more that I'll mention, well, he'll have to be mentioned, he's very significant. Now, I get to the hardest part, I find, when I'm preparing a review. I want to tell you the story, but I don't want to tell you too much because you might really want to read the book. But I want to tell you enough so that you get as enthused about it as I am. And I want you to have a flavor for what I think this book, this author does so very well. I didn't mention it, but I think this is another thing that I always look for in a book that I pick up, and it's the use of language. I just am very fond of well put together sentences, good choice of vocabulary, interesting detail. It's kind of, I guess, probably a habit left over from my years as an English teacher. Now the book opens, and I'm going to read it's a rather lengthy section of the book, but I think I want to do that because it highlights all of these things that I've just mentioned, the character development, the use of language, that sort of thing. The very first chapter, we are introduced to at least 10 characters by name. And I think that's a wonderful way to get into the book. I need something to grab me. I don't want to start reading a book and find I'm turning the pages waiting for something to just grab me. This one grabbed me right from the very start. And then, in the second chapter, we are introduced to Beatrice, who has arrived in town, and she is being, I'll use the term interviewed, by Aunt Agatha.
Really weather alert.
Oh, weather alert. So let me begin with this section to let you know what I'm talking about in terms of the writing style. Aunt Agatha has insisted that Beatrice come right now to the house. She has just had their long train ride and she just wants to settle in, or at least some sense of settling in, but she has to meet with Aunt Agatha. And Aunt Agatha first tells her that you're going to be doing some tutoring now. Hugh has been tutoring these Latin students, but they really, this would be a good way for you to get started. They are local boys, protégés of mine. I told him, Hugh, you were looking for some private tutoring over the summer, and he was very pleased to pass them on to you. Nothing too taxing is involved, just a little help in the more advanced Latin. Not taxing? I disagree. I should be honored, said Beatrice. I tutored the 3 daughters of a professor at our California university, and it was fascinating to watch how Latin blossomed among such a small and eager group. I'm not sure the boys are such blossoms, said Agatha, giving her a doubtful look. Hugh agrees they are bright boys, and one in particular may prove our efforts worthwhile, but they are somewhat rowdy and defiant. Sometimes the hardest challenges are most deserving of our efforts, said Beatrice. I am very grateful to you and the school for giving me the opportunity. Yes, well, we must make sure the school governors have no grounds to cause you trouble. She hesitated, and Beatrice watched her struggle to go on. They did not want to employ me, said Beatrice. She did not ask it as a question. Well, not exactly, said Agatha, but they will come around as long as you succeed. She paused. I am one of only 2 women on the Board of Governors, you know. I am in a very delicate position in which I must temper my impatience for reform and choose my battles with care. We have women teachers, of course, to teach appropriate subjects, but in this case we had some difficulty in finding a suitable replacement for the head Latin master, who left us so abruptly. And your qualifications so exceeded the usual applicant that I did all within my power to push your consideration. Thank you. Of course, you are not quite what I expected, she added. She did not elaborate, and Beatrice, under the pressure of the silence, tried to breathe in a slow way that might suppress any flush in her cheeks. I assure you, my university and teaching certificates are quite in order, she said finally. Your qualifications and Lady Marbley's description of your wide travels and experience suggested someone older, said Agatha. I put away the fripperies of girlhood some years ago, said Beatrice. I have served as my father's secretary and constant companion for many years. But more to the point, I do not have the luxury of waiting around to mature like a cheese. She smiled to soften the rebuke. I do not intend to marry Mrs. Kent, and now that my father is gone, I must earn my bread. Surely you would not deny me the work for which I have studied and trained? I would not, said Agatha, but let's not mention any such awkward necessity. I think we should rely on your connection to the Marbleys and to the suggestion of teaching as service rather than profession to carry the day. As you wish, said Beatrice, trying to keep the dryness out of her tone as she wondered how to ask about her wages and accommodations if she was not allowed to appear in need of either. Of course, I was older than you when I married my husband, said Agatha. She did not phrase it as a question, and so Beatrice, who was tired of people feeling free to interrogate her on her determination to live free of a husband, bit her lip and did not answer. Agatha gave a sigh and continued, The world is changing, Miss Nash, but very slowly. I hope that through the work I do and the work you will do, we may further the causes of intelligence and merit and move our nation forward. Mrs. Kent, am I to suppose that you support the cause of women? Said Beatrice. Good heavens, no, said Agatha. Such hysteria in the streets is impossibly damaging. It is only through such sober activities as school boards and good works, done under the guidance of our most respected and educated gentlemen, that we will prove our worth in the eyes of God and our fellow man. Don't you agree, Miss Nash? You had a pretty good idea of both these women already, don't you? Beatrice was not at all sure that she did agree. She rather thought she might like to vote and to have been admitted to a university degree at Oxford, her father's alma mater. Even the most educated of gentlemen seemed disinclined to remedy such injustices to women without being confronted. She was not sure that Agatha Kent was in earnest either. The face under an arched eyebrow was inscrutable. I only know that I want to teach something other than elementary school, she said. I want to teach and study and write as my father did, and to have my efforts treated no less seriously just because I am a woman. And so the conversation continues, and finally, as Beatrice realizes she is being dismissed, Agatha rose to her feet and held out both hands. It was gracefully done, but Beatrice recognized that she was being dismissed. Good night, Mrs. Kent. And just one more thing, Miss Nash, said Agatha as Beatrice moved toward the hall. I would not be public about any yearnings to write. It would be an absolute disaster for a lady in your position to earn a reputation as a bohemian. Poor Beatrice. But she's here, she's going to make things go well. And Hugh, fortunately, has been, she's introduced to Hugh, the nephew of Aunt Agatha, who invites her to go into take a walk into town. And this is good for Beatrice. She's a party woman. She's going to go out on foot or on bicycle and get acquainted with her new surroundings. Beatrice meets Snout and the two others whom she's going to tutor. She meets Lady Emily, Colonel Wheaton's wife. She meets Mr. Tillingham. There's a garden party to introduce her formally to the people of the town, but all of a sudden there's an obstacle. A last-minute candidate has been found for Beatrice's job. Beatrice is summoned before the school board, along with the rival for her job, and she is already anticipating what might happen. She had declined one other teaching offer in favor of Rye. A northern mill town had offered just the productive life, the challenge of public service that she craved, but her heart had failed her at the thought of soot-blackened streets and rows of tenement cottages running across the hills. She had been forced to laugh at her own hypocrisy in choosing seaside Sussex over the surely greater educational impact she might make among the children of factory workers. Now she wondered if she would have time to write again and ask them to reconsider her. If not, she might eke out a few weeks at a friend's house near Brighton, but her chances of finding some other position immediately were not good. She had no romantic notions of becoming a parlor maid or an actress, and she had never had patience with those more literary heroines who solved their problems with a knife or an oncoming train. She would have to write to Marberly Hall at some point and ask to come back. Defeated before she starts, she thinks. But Hugh and Daniel take care of that. The rival just happens to be the nephew of Mayor Fothergill, and he is waiting for his chance to be interviewed, but Hugh and Daniel take him off to the pub. And guess what happens to poor Mr. Poot? How do you like that for another nice name? Mr. Poot is described as being a rather unsteady candidate when Beatrice is surprised to find out that she still has the job. Now remember, this is summer, so school hasn't started yet. Beatrice is still learning her surroundings. She has particularly dingy lodgings with a Mrs. Turber. Mrs. Turber is very thrifty, shall we say, about what she supplies to her tenants, boarders, whatever title Beatrice has assumed. And one day, just to get away from these rather shady, shabby surroundings, Beatrice takes a bicycle ride and a picnic. Gets far, far away, kind of loses where she's headed, what time it is, and eventually, poor thing, falls off her bicycle into a ditch, and there she is with a very sore ankle. She's not sure whether it's broken or twisted or bruised or whatever, but there she is. So, who comes along to her rescue? Hugh. Hugh happens to be out driving his Aunt Agatha on their sick visits, they're called. There are certain people in the outlying districts of Rye who don't get the good Dr. Lawton in town. He is okay, they don't go to town to see him, but he is okay about seeing them in their surroundings. And Aunt Agatha has kind of taken on the opportunity to also visit these people, and she brings them food things that they need. So this is one of the sick visits that Hugh and Aunt Agatha are making. Hugh, they discover Beatrice, they grab her up, put her in the wagon, no automobile, just a wagon here. They go to their next stop, which happens to be at Mrs. Stokes' house, Maria Stokes. Maria Stokes is another one of these outsiders. She's a gypsy. She is the gypsy great-grandmother of Snout, the superior Latin student. She's also very good with homemade remedies, and she gets medicine from Dr. Lawton, but she also has her own ways of treating people. So, a good opportunity for Beatrice to be introduced to some other part of the civilization in Rye. Hugh is summoned, by the way, Uncle John, when they get back home after this visit, Uncle John is on an unexpected visit from London because the war is fast encroaching, and he's letting the people of Rye know what is going to happen to their nice, quiet, peaceful civilization. Hugh is summoned to London by Dr. Ramsay because Dr. Ramsay has a great plan for going to war with 100 medical men. And he's going to recruit them all himself, he's going to take them there, and what will this do for our profession? We'll have all sorts of wounds to look at. We'll have brain injuries we can study. We'll probably get some good diagnostic tools that the military will supply. So that's his impetus for being a patriot, and Hugh wants nothing of that. He kind of puts Dr. Ramsay off by saying, I really have to talk to my aunt and uncle and my father, and of course this might make things with Lucy a little difficult, but that's the way Hugh is going to manage this. So we're close to the end of the first part where the war is just starting to make an incursion into Rye. And one of those first incursions is of course going to be rationing. So that people learn pretty soon what they can and cannot get from the local butcher, baker, everybody, but guess where there's a lot of stock? In the bookstore. You can get any books you want if you have money to buy them, but other things are not quite so available. Also coming will be the refugees, of course. So what do? You form a refugee committee to welcome these. And we're called upon to bring relief and succor to the tens of thousands of our poor, innocent Belgian brethren fleeing these atrocities. How many? Somebody wants to know. Well, we thought to fetch perhaps 10 or 12 suitable refugees to begin with. Pick and choose. That's Mayor Fothergill's wife. And she very much wants to be the head of this refugee committee. But in a coup, Agatha assures that Mr. Tillingham, Professor Tillingham, will have that opportunity. So Mr. Tillingham makes quite a speech. This small corner of immutable England has been a home and a refuge for this poor wandering scribe, and so I cannot express my gratitude that you would entrust me to represent you in this important cause. He held his hat over his heart and looked to the heavens as if asking for divine inspiration. In a time of great peril, one cannot but look around this ancient town filled with generations of stout-hearted, generous English men and women, and know that our Belgian neighbors could not ask a kinder, more welcoming sanctuary. And Aunt Agatha whispers to Beatrice, actually, the good people of our town are as frugal and suspicious a group as I have ever met, and they actively dislike all foreigners. But we will hope for the best. Nice attitude to begin your refugee response here. Just a little bit further, in fact, this is at the beginning of the next part of the book. Some of these refugees have now come to town, and including Celeste and her father, the professor, and there are always these decisions as to where these refugees will be housed. Hugh speaks up and says, we have a number of large families who understandably do not wish to be parted. Meanwhile, many well-meaning ladies have made meticulous arrangements to take in 1 or 2 guests each. Ironic that families who cleave together through German brutality may be forced asunder by English charity. Wry remark from his part. Mrs. Fothergill says, we had requested mostly children, but my husband said the people in charge were quite rude about it. Mr. Range, you were there. Were there no children to be had? We managed 1 or 2, said Hugh, but as you can see, they come with parents and grandparents attached, and they are unwilling to part with them. One could have also have wished for more genteel folk, said Mrs. Fothergill, who frowned at a man noisily drinking from a teacup held in both hands. Of course, we will succor all who need us, But it is quite impossible to ask our ladies to take absolute peasants into their own houses, however charming their wooden clogs. Don't you love her? Okay, now we have to get these refugees settled. There's a gathering at Tillingham's house. He has taken in Professor, the father of Celeste, but he's a bachelor and he really shouldn't have that young girl in his house. So the young girl shares poor Beatrice's meager accommodations and pretty shabby lodgings, but that's fine. Beatrice is able to do that. Now there starts to be a problem for Beatrice with money. So she asks for an advance on her inheritance, which is refused. And in fact, she is told that someone local will have to manage her money for her, hold her accountable before any bills will be paid out of the inheritance. So guess who gets that job? Mr. Fothergill, with Mrs. Fothergill attending to details, because actually it's better for a woman to know some of those purchases that another woman is making. Now this sits very poorly with Beatrice, and we see a rather, she's very strong-willed at this point. That stubborn streak that one of the reviewers talked about comes out, and she absolutely refuses to agree to this. So Mr. Poot, remember him, the nephew of the mayor who lost out on the job to Beatrice, he says he will do it for her as a favor, and then it'll be a lot easier than dealing with his uncle. So we think, oh, okay, what's going on here? In addition to being refused money by her family, she is also told to return certain letters and a manuscript that she's been working on about her father. So another thing that sits not well at all with Beatrice. Now, besides forming the refugee committee, what do you do now? What do you do? You've got some patriotism to display. You've got some fun to show the people. So we're going to have a festival. We're going to have a parade. We're going to have a party. We're going to do all these wonderful things to show, to try to raise money. It's intended to be a fundraiser, to try to raise money to help these refugees. In the meanwhile, we have other people coming to town. This is the point at which Algernon and his wife come back, or come to town, and they are shunned by the people of Rye for their scandalous relationship. I mentioned that there was another character I should have told you about earlier. Daniel, the poet, has a very good friend, Craigmore, who is the son of another very important military figure here in this story. And Craigmore and Daniel have this plan that first of all, their plan was to go to London and they're just going to start a kind of well, it's a journal, but they also think that this will help for the war cause. You know, we'll publish patriotic poems and we'll publish patriotic pictures, and this will be our part in the war. Well, Lord North, Craigmore's father, has no fondness for this plan, and in fact whisks his son away, gets him a military commission and a fiancé. Not what anybody expected. We continue with this whole resettlement of the refugees, and we have kind of something going on with Aunt Agatha, who's very, very distressed over all this. And I think understandably so. Her two nephews are going to get involved somehow in this war, somehow be given some kind of military assignment, and she's just in a funk. She's not socializing, she's not even seeing anybody, and this is unlike Aunt Agatha. So finally, this is the end, toward the end of part 2, and we finally get school started, which Beatrice is looking forward to. In fact, she says it's a relief. The schoolroom called to her as if it were the sweet voice of civilization itself, summoning her to the white marble halls where poetry and mathematics, painting and song all echoed together in peaceful harmony. As she descended the hill, skirted the busy railway yard, and approached the neat school with its red tiled gables and bright window boxes, a hope swelled within her that the innocence of school children might sweep the war from her eyes on this bright September day and from the earth tomorrow. Quite a hope, but certainly not to be realized. So, part 3 starts with this festival that the town has been planning. And unfortunately, Mrs. Fothergill adds a surprise element to the floats that she has designed and created, and the ladies representing the various parts of the British Empire. She has Celeste on one of these floats, and the float is attacked by German soldiers, ride residents in German soldier outfits, and Celeste becomes absolutely hysterical. She is rushed back to her lodging. Hugh takes her back there. Hugh's concerned about the cause of this. He wants to get, well, they all want to get back to the festival, but Celeste cannot be left alone. Beatrice offers to stay with her, but Hugh is not really comfortable with what he thinks he has seen dealing with Celeste. So he calls in another medical expert, Mrs. Stokes, the gypsy woman. Mrs. Turber doesn't like that. She's not supposed to have gypsies in her home, and there's another whole altercation there. And the disturbance, the result or the cause of the disturbance is to be attributed to Celeste's rape by a German soldier. So Celeste is with child, and Hugh and Mrs. Stokes worked very hard to save that child. Save an illegitimate child in 1914. Not the brightest of outcomes for this poor girl, not likely to happen. Other things going on while this is happening. Craig Moore, a friend of Daniel who has been whisked away by his father. Craig Moore, during the feast, he's in the flying boat, by the way, that was his commission. He and some friends buzz the field during the festival, and on the return to wherever they set off from, Craig Moore's plane goes down. So we have another complication, another situation to be dealt with that is, of course, extremely disturbing to Daniel. Hugh and Daniel go off to London, which is where Craig Moore's family is, and they are refused access to see Craig Moore's body. Daniel can't go to the funeral. He's banned from the funeral, and that sends Daniel into quite a spiral. But the important thing, I think, at this point is what to do about Celeste. Father has a great idea. 3 nuns are among the Belgian refugees. Celeste can go with them, join the convent. Nice, huh? Just get rid of her. And Beatrice says, well, what about the child when she hears about this arrangement? Their order takes in unwed mothers and finds home for such babies. Beatrice is appalled that Celeste is even thinking about this as a possibility. You do not have to do this, Celeste. We will find another way. If I do this, my father can stay here with Mr. Tillingham. Otherwise, they say we must both make a long journey, and his health. It is not so good. Of course, it's a brilliant solution for him, said Beatrice, but what about what you want? Did you not serve your father faithfully until his death? Is it not the daughter's place to bring the father ease? And this sets Beatrice to thinking. Her father, in a sense, has done the same thing, not quite as drastically, but he's left her, put her off to be taken care of by somebody who really doesn't have a vested interest. And as she says, he traded her future for a few months of nostalgia. She says to Celeste, I think it is a father's task to protect us, but if he fails, if he betrays us, we must protect ourselves. So, how do we do that? We have a possible solution here because Daniel insisted that he is going to enlist against his aunt and uncle's wishes, against everybody's advice. He's not the soldier type. He goes on, insists on enlisting, but before he leaves, Celeste goes missing. And so does Mrs. Turber's pistol, which she always kept under her pillow at night. So we have the possibility of something terrible happening with Celeste. However, again, we have a rescue. Hugh, Daniel, Beatrice all go looking for Celeste. They find her. Daniel talks with Celeste, and it's a perfect solution. He will marry Celeste because that will save him from the inquiry that's being held over why he should not be dishonorably discharged from the military because of his, I'll call it, alternative lifestyle. So, good solution. It's going to work out all right, except the professor doesn't agree to that. Celeste is not going to marry. She's going to go off with the nuns. Celeste has a reason to fight back, as Beatrice has fought back. She has something that she can hold against her father if he does not agree to this plan, and the father gives in. So as part 3 ends, the last section that takes place in Rye, we have Daniel and Celeste being married, we have Hugh and Daniel leaving for France. And part 4 takes place a mere 100 miles away across the English Channel. The tone of the novel changes dramatically. We're in battle now. And I think what else changes dramatically is, although he's, I think, always been a very strong character and a very upright, forthright man, Hugh becomes the man he was destined to be. He had always thought it would be nice to be a prominent surgeon in London, live in a big house, be married to his mentor's daughter, but not anymore. He has seen too much on the battlefield. So his whole idea of how life should be lived changes. And in this section, Hugh becomes a real hero. He performs surgery constantly. He hardly sleeps. He finds he has an opportunity to go visit where his cousin Daniel is stationed. And interestingly enough, Snout. I haven't said too much about him, although he's one of my favorite characters, this good old Latin student who has enlisted himself, even though he's underage. His parents let him go. And he is what is called a batman. He serves as an aide to one of the officers. He has a cart that he pulls. He brings in, one of the major scenes in this part of the book is a big, kind of like a state dinner being held. Bombs going off all around, trouble happening, but they managed to secure some supplies to make a really nice dinner for the important military people. That goes awry. And I think at this point I'm going to stop telling you too much about what goes on because there are some really significant events that happen at this point. And I will also tell you that in the epilogue, 4 of the characters that we had met previously in 1920, so several years after the novel first begins, are together in a setting in France. And a big secret is revealed. Or as they say on HGTV, there's a reveal. And I'm not going to tell you that either. I'm going to tell you, you have to read this very important book to find out that secret. And I also have to tell you that this is the 3rd time I've read this book, and it's the first time I saw any of the hints leading to this secret. So it's not one of those, sudden twists of plot that always annoy me because I'm not ready for it and it shouldn't be there at the last minute. It was my poor reading that missed the clues the first 2 times I read it. A wonderful book. I cannot recommend it highly enough, and I hope you enjoy it. reading it for yourselves. Not much time left, but I'll answer a question or two if anybody has, but not about the ending. Okay, well, thank you very much. Enjoyed my time here.